Hello everyone, Yadagaba, Yama, Gaitanea, Yarada, Ualarai, Gamilaroi, Dinawan, Bulan, Malayan, Bula, Girabili, Bully, Dirambandi D, Naya, Yala Gidmaga, Winanayi, Gadigal, Wale Dan, Galga, Nanu, Wale Bana, Nale, Buddha, Gagiga, Gabaninda. On behalf of all of us, I'm acknowledging that we're on the land of the Gadigal people and paying respects to the way in which they've shared story on this country and the wisdom that they have. It feels very appropriate to be doing this very important protocol at this time as we acknowledge both the wisdom of our elders, the resilience of our communities and the importance of the continuation of storytelling. I'm Larissa Behrendt and I'm very privileged to be welcoming you to the Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival, and also a big welcome to everyone joining us by Zoom, especially those in New South Wales who are watching through your local libraries. So this panel is called Justice and the Wisdom of Elders, and we're asking, is justice delivered justly to all, or are some groups better served by justice systems than others? So to explore this question, we're very honoured with the company and wisdom of three remarkable people: Aunty Barbara Nicholson, Aunty Bronwyn Penrith, and Veronica Gorrie, who I would consider a young auntie, and in this way a very remarkable group of women. I'm from a culture that I'm very proud honours our women as they become older and celebrates their wisdom and intelligence. And I just want to underline one thing about the concept of elders in our community. We don't give ourselves that title. You don't get to be one by reaching a certain age. It's a title that's given to you by other people out of their respect for you, out of what you've done. It's earned, and in each of their own ways, my panellists have earned it, even though Ronnie and I would say we're still on that path, importantly, but I just want to say that, put that in that context. With those introductory remarks, I've got a little bit of housekeeping, so make sure you put your mobile phones on mute and don't record the sessions, but if you're taking photographs, please turn your flash off. And you can share on social media or on Facebook and Instagram at Bad Crimes Sydney, or with the hashtag Bad Crimes Sydney on Twitter. And so that you can hear more from the panel, the festival this year is trialling not having audience from the questions after feedback from other festivals. So if you're not happy with that decision, you might want to raise it with people so they can take that on board. But you are most welcome to talk to the speakers outside of the auditorium after they've finished, and especially after they've finished signing their books. I was thinking about this panel when I was putting my notes together. And it reminded me of a time when I was studying at Harvard, and there was an Australian lawyer there who'd done his law degree in Australia and, like me, had done his master's at Harvard and was now doing a PhD. And I saw him as he had a light bulb moment, and he turned to me and said, in shock, "You know, the law really isn't fair." And I marvelled at the privilege of how you got to be in your mid-20s in Australia and never think about how unjust the legal system was, particularly when you worked in it. As the granddaughter of members of the stolen generation, with family members who died in custody, and a traditional owner who grew up with no recognition of my right to my own country, I've learnt from my community and from women like the ones on the panel, and particularly Aunty Barb and Aunty Bronwyn, who've had a role in my life, that justice is not fairness and the law is not fair. So we're very privileged to have the insights of women from the front line, and I'm going to ask each of them, as I introduce them, to talk a little bit about their lived experience. And I guess one of the things we like to do when we're talking to other Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people is to ask who your mob is. But in that way, my first question to each of you will be, you know, what shaped your identity of who you are? What's influenced your sense of social justice, and what have you learnt from your elders? So to start us off, Ronnie Gorrie is a Gunai Kurnai woman who lives and writes in Victoria. Her first book, Black and Blue, which was released in 2021, won the Victorian Premier's Literary Prize for Literature and the Premier's Literary Award for Indigenous Writing, and it was shortlisted for a number of other prizes to give you a sense of how impactful that book was. It is a memoir that traces Ronnie's experiences through her life. It's a powerful memoir, but also looks at her time in the police force. So I wanted to just kind of mention that because I'm really giving it a bit of a plug and encouraging you to have a look at that book as well, because it's an extraordinary insight into the lived experience of Aboriginal people and the resilience of Aboriginal people. But she's also the editor of When Cops Are Criminals, which has been published and examines the widespread problem of police brutality and corruption, so we will be talking about that. But let's start with you, Ronnie, a little bit about who you are, what influenced you, where you got this sense of social justice from.
Yeah, Larissa, good question. So my name's Veronica Gorrie. I'm a Ngana Barangarai woman. I'm fortunate enough to live and work on country. My pronouns are she and her. So I think my grandmother's always like she was so staunch, and I write about her in Black and Blue. So Black and Blue is made up of two parts. So in the black part, I talk a lot about my family and growing up as an Aboriginal child, and my grandmother, who was stolen when she was 8 years old, and then had my father when she was 16, and he was stolen from her, and she fought for 4 years to get my dad back, and that's just the power of my grandmother. And a lot of people didn't get to do that, and you know we all know the consequences of that. They will never reunited with their children ever again, unfortunately. But my grandmother was so staunch and fought the system and won. So that's who I get my power from.
Now, Aunty Barbara Nicholson is a Wadi elder from Illawarra. She's got degrees in English literature and an honorary doctorate of law from the University of Wollongong. She's a poet, widely published, and she's the director of Ngana Barangarai. Barangarai. Always still learning from you, Aunty, which is the word for black wallaby. And this is a project that publishes the voices and contributions of First Nations people in prison. It published a book called Dreaming Inside, Voices from Junee Correctional Centre. And now there's a volume called Voices from Wiradjuri Correctional Centre, right. Sister Green Sea Dreaming, written by incarcerated First Nations women. But before we get into that work that you're doing in prisons, can you share with us where you get your sense of identity from, where you grew up, and what's shaped your interest in social justice?
That's a long story, Larissa. How much time have we got? My goodness me. Okay, so I was born on what we now refer to as the Mish at Port Kembla, but it was never a mission. It was an open reserve, and I was born there. I'm a depression baby, so I'm old now, and life was very tough because there was no sanitation services, no electricity, water, or anything like that there on that place. We just called it the camp. I think it was known as the official camp. Anyway, that's where I was born, in a little humpy. Bits of tin and hessian bags and cardboard made up the structure. And the Catholic Church was active in that district, and the priest used to apparently always come and do a bit of coercive control over getting kids to go to the school. And so at barely 3 years of age, I began school at the Catholic school in Port Kembla. And before I was 3.5, I got expelled. I wanted to do a wetty and they wouldn't let me go to the toilet, so I did it in my little drinking cup in the passageway. And apparently that was a cardinal sin, so I got expelled. I I think that, and then when I finally did get back to go back to school at about 4 years, or a bit over 4 years of age, the nuns used to take us kids from the camp to the ablution block in the far corner of the playground and strip us down to our knickers and hose us down so we'd be hygienic enough to be in class with all the other polished, shiny kids. I think, I didn't think about it for a long, long time, but my retrospective thought on it is that's when the seeds of social justice were sown, right back then, to that little 4-year-old girl who was so badly treated, who wasn't allowed to have a wetty, who wasn't allowed to be in class unless she was hosed off. Right, so I think it took a long time for the notion of social justice to materialise in any way, but eventually it did after I grew up and had a disastrous marriage and too many kids to look after on my own, and and not being treated well there. The manifestation was happening. It was emerging, and I could feel it rumbling and rumbling away until eventually it did erupt into full-blown everything, activism, proactive writing, poetry writing. It was all protest stuff I was writing at the time, and and over time I got in touch with a lot of various organisations and became very proactive, among them Aboriginal Deaths in Custody Watch Committee, the Link Up organisation, and numerous other things that I've had forays into, and then particularly into writing and particularly into prison work, which I still do.
Excellent, thank you for sharing that. Aunty Bronwyn, I've known Aunty Bronwyn since I was a young teenager, and she's been a wonderful influence. Aunty Bronwyn is a important figure in the Redfern community. She's a Wiradjuri woman from New South Wales. She's been a leader for Aboriginal women in this area. She's a director of the Redfern Foundation at the moment, and is currently the chairperson of the Mudjingal Aboriginal Women's Corporation, which she's been involved with for a really, really long time. And it is the most important women's service that we have in this area for Aboriginal women. It takes a really holistic approach. Aunty Bronwyn's been really active in the community, being on a range of things, a representative on ministerial advisory committees, involved with national gatherings. She's been a part of the Redfern Waterloo Task Force on family and community violence, and a whole range of other leadership positions. So Aunty Bronwyn, wonder if you can share with us, what shaped your identity, your sense of social justice?
Well, I probably should start by upgrading my resume.
Yeah.
I'm no longer at Mudjingal.
Oh, aren't you?
Mudjingal Women's Centre in...
You were there for so long.
I stepped, 30 years.
Yes.
Since its inception.
Yeah.
In different forms, but I stepped down a couple of years ago, which gives me more time to do this stuff. And,
that's good.
And I say I'm their best customer now, so if they don't give good service, I'm the first one to put in the complaint. I come from a little place called Bronwyn, but I want to talk about my South Coast side. Okay. Yes. My family came from, on the Penrith side, came from Wallaby Lake. And that's where my native title is. But my mother, who was a sister to someone you might recognise, Burnham, they all went into the system when their mother had passed away, and they went into the homes. Uncle Harry was a baby, my mother was a toddler, and my Uncle Clem was about 4 or 5. They went to Bomonderry homes. Their mother was Lily Jemima McRae from around Lake Tyers and further down from, you know, my great-grandfather's a very famous artist, Tommy McRae. Some of you might have heard him since we're in this place. Anyway, when Irene, my mother, I'll refer her by her first name because I grew up with her like a sister, when she had me, she was put into a unmarried mother's home, I suppose you might call it today, because there were non-Aboriginal people there, and that was in Newcastle. And I was born in Newcastle. I don't know if I ever told you this. Because everyone says, tell me about your Wiradjuri mob. And so she wasn't allowed to keep me. Under some, and I've only met one other person that had this same circumstance, actually through his mother and grandmother. There was a woman there that worked for the Aboriginal Protection or Welfare, what it was called in the day, named Mrs. English. I don't know if you'd ever heard that name. And she knew my grandmother in Brungle from when she'd been sent out to work from school when she was 12 years old and spent 5 or 6 years here in Sydney. So she got in touch with them and took me at 7 weeks old to Brungle. Brungle, Tumut, Gundagai, up near the Snowy Mountains and in Wiradjuri country. So there I stayed. And so when one other thing I just want to mention too is at the end of the year, there's going to be a book coming out. It's called Sisters in the Struggle. And it's about a time in Redfern in the 1970s, which was the inception, the beginning of self-determination, and the beginnings of the first Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. And the women's role. I suppose we could, well, you should be able to roll the men's name off your tongue. But in the last couple of years, we've been trying to do something about what the influence of us women, that were young women there at that time. I know. Talk for ages, eh? But I'll stop now.
It's very good, thank you. I love that I've known you for over 40 years and I still find out new things about you. Ronnie, we might start with you. Obviously, one of the big questions we've got on the panel today is asking if some groups are treated differently than others. Now, having read your work, I have a sense that you might have a view about this, and I wonder if you could share with us what your response is to that question.
Yeah, so being a former police officer of 10 years, so I got to witness firsthand how police treat my people from the inside out, and how they treated Aboriginal people who were coppers as well. And I think that's what, if anything comes out of Black and Blue, I want that read it to you. That's what I want them to walk away with, just how bad they treat people that, you know, just the brutality, the racial profiling of my people that police do, the violence, the killings, the justice system was originally set up to lock Aboriginal people up, and it's working. So with us, there is no justice in this colony. Yeah, I don't think I've answered the question though, have I?
Oh no, you have in that way. But I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit more about the sorts of things that you did see when you were working in that very unique position as an Aboriginal woman in the police force. And particularly, I guess, there's things that people often think the law's just applied neutrally, but there's a lot of discretion in the way police officers operate. And I wonder if you could maybe give some reflections about how that works when racism's part of the system.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of racism towards my people, like in the community, obviously with the racial profiling. So God forbid you have a nice car or even drive a licence as an Aboriginal person or a black or brown person in the community, you will be intercepted, stopped, and if you're deemed to be a smart ass, they will take you back to the station and strip search you and then try to find charges to load you up on. That happens time and time again. It's really bad, and you know, even just this month, I think that's the 12th of September today, and already we've had 3 Aboriginal deaths in custody just this month. And I just, it's like it's seeing how police treated my own people. So initially I joined the police because I had this idea that I could make a difference and bridge the gap between my community towards police and to let them know that they're safe. But police for us is not a place of safety. So we don't generally call police when we have conflict in our communities or within our family systems. We call our family first, and we've been doing it prior to colonisation. We never had a police prior to colonisation. There was no need for it. It was only when the settlers arrived, that's when the police were formed. And I guess, non-Indigenous people needed the police. We still don't need it. Right now, there's detentions, youth prisons or cages with 100% Aboriginal children in there. And in particular, I'm talking about Northern Territory. So, and a lot of they shouldn't be locked up, they should be at home with their families. And if they can't be with their parents, there's other family members, and that's how we work as a community. Like we look after it. It takes a village to raise a child, and it's, it's really typical and normal for us to do that. So, yeah.
And I just wonder from that perspective, we're hearing a lot in the news at the moment, both from the Northern Territory and Queensland, about youth crime, and that the response to that is to lock kids up. And I just wonder what your reflections are on that.
Yeah, so not with Northern Territory, I'll speak about that, but so they raised the age of criminal responsibility to 14, and now they're doing a backflip and lowering it back to 10 years old. For anyone who's got kids or had, can you imagine your 10-year-old child in prison, locked up? It's unheard of. It's like sending your child to your room for 5 years, do not come out for 5 years. It's just disgraceful. There's other ways, and as an abolitionist, what I'm trying to say, and as other abolitionists are trying to say, is that the governments should be investing more money in community organisations that are already doing the work of abolition, and instead of giving money to the police and funding them for new vehicles and new weapons and all that, there's other answers. And like I said earlier, Larissa, we don't call police. It's not a place of, they're not safe for us. They actually cause so much harm to people, to us especially. And we have a few, I don't know if you've got a family, we all worry about our families when they leave the house. They may be the next staff in custody. And if you've got children or adult children, do you have that concern? Probably not. But we live with that every day.
And just finally, in the new book that you've edited, When Cops Are Criminals, I just wonder if there were any insights or things from that you might share that would add a little bit more to the conversation about the way the legal system treats people differently.
Yeah, so the anthology, there's a group of contributors that I've made contact with, and they've all had bad experiences with the justice system and police and carceral agents as well. So I'm talking about prison officers as well. And I've deliberately included, there's a diversity in the book. So there's people who identify as trans as well, the LGBTQI plus community, marginalised people, homeless people, rough sleepers. Police target these people, and my people especially. I'm just so angry right at the moment, but I mightn't look angry, but I'm squeezing the shit out of this ball. With us mob, our families, the prisons and the justice system is set up like a revolving door for us mob, but we'll go back further than that. Even as a child, they're criminalised, right? and they've got a criminal history, what hope do they have as an adult to live a fulfilled life and successful life as an adult when they're already being criminalised as a child? Yeah, I could go on for days, but the anthologies, I've got a heap of contributors who have shared their experiences of police brutality against them. There's a couple of ex-wives of coppers who have, during the day or their shift, gone to work and arrested the same, people who have committed domestic violence and then gone home and flogged the shit out of their wife and done the same thing. What they've arrested someone else for, it doesn't make sense. But yeah, and it explains. Sorry, Larissa, you go.
I know.
No, you go. Finished.
I was just going to say it's one of the things I think is really important about the anthology is that it does give us a chance to hear from voices that we don't hear from, who are often silenced within the system.
Yeah. Yeah, and I knew that I could have went to all just Aboriginal people and just got every whole anthology of Aboriginal people to write it, but I deliberately wanted diversity, and
and the fact that you do work to give us an insight into voices we don't hear from is probably a good time to turn to your work, Aunty Barbara. But first of all, can you share with us your thoughts on the big question we're asking on the panel, which is, how does law treat different groups differently? I mean, you talked about your experiences as a young girl, but you've seen a lot in your life and worked in a lot of places. What have you seen?
Sadly, far too much, because it just never stops. How does the law treat it differently? Look, recently I attended the Juvenile Justice Centre in Brisbane for Queensland Youth Justice, who have tied themselves together with my project and produced an anthology of the young people there. The facility holds about 130 all up. I asked the question there, what was the percentage of Aboriginal kids, and they're boys and girls at that facility, what was the percentage of Aboriginal kids in that facility? And the response I got was in excess of 50%. So more than half of the kids in that facility are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander kids. I think that answers the question, really. Why is it? We're only less than 3% of the population nationally, but more than half of the population of just one facility. You can multiply that by 1,000. I think to take another look at another thing is the Northern Territory, the new government in the Northern Territory now reducing the age of responsibility to 10 years of age. These are children. They're kids. They're little kids. If you locked your kid away in the bedroom because it didn't eat its dinner or eat its green vegetables or whatever, you could be done like a dinner. But the state can lock away these children, and when did we ever think it was a good idea to put children in a prison? I can tell you all of these juvenile justice centres are prisons by any definition, and if we think that that's a good idea to put children in there, then I think we have to take a long, hard look at ourselves and think what makes us think that that's okay. It is not okay. I think I probably deviate a little bit. There's so many instances that there's so many exemplars of the difference, how people are treated. You have to know that when one Aboriginal kid in the family comes to police notice by whatever means, then that whole family get targeted, and the police presence in their life, in that community perhaps, is extraordinary. You have to know that when you walk through a shopping centre and there's an Aboriginal kid there who nicks an apple from the vegetable display, fruit and veg display, and they call the cops, but they didn't take any notice of the man in the lovely suit distinguished looking character with a nice hat, suit and tie and everything, and he's standing there eating grapes from the display. They didn't send him to the police. You know that things are different. And I think I'm deviating, Larissa.
No, not at all.
Am I there?
No, I guess my next kind of question for you was, with the work that you've been doing in prisons around writing, what are some of the stories that you're hearing there?
You know, for 13 years I've been going to Junee Correctional Centre doing creative writing workshops, and I've produced so far 12 anthologies of inmate writing. And we've got volume 13 is a work in progress at the moment to be done next year. We've done one book from Dilwinia Women's Prison, which is out near Windsor, and we've with another one in progress from there. We've had collaboration with Queensland Youth Justice, and they've actually published theirs, and that's it there, and I believe it's on sale out there side somewhere. So that's Queensland Youth Justice one. And we're about to launch our very first one from New South Wales Youth Justice from 2 juvenile detention centres, which are Cobham and Reby. Reby's girls, Cobham is boys. I can tell you these centres are not some benign, happy place. They are prisons by any definition. There's no question about that. So we just done all of these books. This is the one we're about to launch on Saturday the 21st of this month at Wollongong Art Gallery, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Your question was again...
It was what sorts of stories do you
hear? The stories? Okay. What we do is give the resident inmate writers free rein to write about whatever they want to write about. We do coax them, of course, and suggest things and so on, but inevitably they write about home, they write about family, they write about connection to family, connection to kin, connection to country. They write about love of their children. They write about injustice. So many of them, particularly in the adult prisons, are there on remand, which means they haven't been sentenced, or maybe they haven't even had a trial yet. And they can be spending lots of time, and they write a lot about that. In every single volume of the books from the adult prisons, they write about deaths in custody, which is my particular interest. And I know that, for example, in the financial year 22-23, nationwide, according to statistics from the Australian Institute of Criminology, 31 Aboriginal people died in custody. The number is conservative because what is not counted are the ones who are no longer incarcerated but are on parole or on intensive correction orders, and they have died. I know for sure, and just last month, in August alone, I got notification from friends at Junee Correctional Centre, that is staff, to notify me of the death of 6 inmates who are in our books, right? But not in custody. One might have been, I'm not clear about one, but 5 of them died outside. One got out, took his life the next day. Another one got out, took his life a week later. Another one died of a massive heart attack. They were outside, but every one of them were on parole or on intensive correction orders. And we argued back in the days of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody that if you are on parole, you are in a custodial situation. We didn't have the ICOs at the time, but certainly parole and community service orders and so on, they are custodial situations. So, and I've argued long and hard that those deaths should be counted as deaths in custody and added to the 31 that died while incarcerated. So, yeah, it's a long, hard roll. There's that discrimination as well, and it is a discrimination. It fudges the figures. So, yeah, the boys write about all this stuff. Some of it is actually gut-wrenching, some of the things they write. There was one written by a lad who preferred to be known as Tank. I think he's in volume 12 of Dreaming Inside. And he wrote at length about this lad who, in the cell next to him, who took his own life, you know, in the cell. And he actually, you could nearly wipe his tears off the page. It was so heart-wrenching that, and we don't think about that, the effect on the other inmates when there is a death in custody, you know. They form families in prison. And so, you know, their families, and another one's gone. But, yeah.
Well, thank you for finding space to give them voice, Aunty Barb. We'll come back to you about that. Aunty Bronwyn, spent a lot of time in Redfern. You'd have a few things to say about how the law treats different people differently. I wonder if you could share your thoughts on what you've seen, both from your own lived experience, of course, but with the many women that you've helped through Mudgeongal over the years. Don't forget your microphone.
My early experience in the 1970s was, of course, just watching the police bashing blackfellows, especially as you come out of a place called the Empress Hotel. Now, this is the days that were pre to Aboriginal organisations, so before the Aboriginal organisations. And the Empress Hotel was a place where people gathered and met. If you come down, and actually there's a play about this. Oh, I talk about digressing off onto something else, called The Cake Man, which was performed at Black Theatre in Redfern in 1972. And the person in that play who came to Sydney, had a big family and lived in one of the missions, Cowra, came down to find work, and of course he got arrested, before he could even get in the door, he gets chucked into the van. This is how prevalent the stories are. They become part of the fabric of our storytelling about being arrested in Redfern and beaten. I think I'm on record in the Redfern Story, a documentary about those days, in saying that there were many stories about the police throwing women into that van. You know, they never made it to the police station, and I would allege that they were sexually assaulted. It was just common. So sticking together, in those days the police didn't have to wear badges, so it was very hard to identify them. You had the 21st Division. They were famous corrupt, I think they were proven to be corrupt, police squad, I suppose you call them. He used to just come in there and bash come in there and rampage through the Empress Hotel. Of course, then there were the marches, when people did stand up and march. You could be subjected again to beatings, harassment and abuse, not only by the police but by the general public. Because I'm involved in some of the women's issues, one of our very serious current issues, and I actually raised this a few years ago, and now it's become, there's something happening about it, and that's arresting when police are called out for a domestic violence issue, often the woman who's called them gets arrested because she's upset, she's frustrated by the way the police talk to her, which is often very disrespectful. In fact, it's not too long ago in my family, where one of my teenage granddaughters answered the door to a call for support in the domestic violence and abuse situation. They didn't take the perpetrator, and they threatened her. So if she didn't calm down, they'd arrest her. So that's going to really calm you down, eh? I wasn't on the phone about 500-600 kilometres away. So it was very, very, very disturbing for me. For Mudgee Women's Centre, we've done a bit of work with women in prison, with Thalia Anthony, Professor Thalia Anthony. She put together those interviews, which I supported her with, and we made exhibition of them, of the women's words there at Mudgee. So around the periphery, the other thing I probably should tell you is that I'm also on New South Wales Women's Legal Service, WILS. I'm on the board, and I'm also part of their women's Aboriginal Women's Network, First Nations Women's Network. Can remember that part. And so, although they don't, they do a lot of community education, and they don't appear at court with domestic violence, but they do some. Often, it's around children going being taken away, and cases where there is what do you call it? A whole group of people get together and take a suit. Is it? Class action? Yeah, class actions. So they'll do that sort of thing, and they done a very successful one a few years ago for people who were involved in some sort of home at Walgett Way. You see, I don't come from there. That's a long way apart, eh? I come from the mountains and the seas. So those are sort of things that I've been involved in. And of course now where I live down Waterloo, nothing much changed there. The place I get pulled up probably, I've been there for 10 years, I get pulled up probably every month.
You should run from a man. Do a runner.
Get the car checked out. I think, why? It's just annoying. But, you know, we sit at the front and watch. It's like, I just grab them like sharks. They circle till they find or cause a disruption. Someone moves too fast, they get chased. Maybe they're guilty of something, but, you know, a lot of blackfellas run just because they see police, and you may or may not be aware of the case of that young man, TJ Hickey, who rode his bike and the police chased him, and he stacked his bike and ended up on a bike on the fence. And it's a big case which there's commemorations every year still in Redfern, and, you know, that's just one that comes to mind. I've just come here today. I've taken an hour or so out from a First Nations Justice Conference down in William Street, and just there today listening to, we talk about injustices, if you can get hold of some of those papers, because there are a lot of facts and figures there, and no one has said that it's improved so much or that it's doing a good job. And in fact, we had a big conversation about whether you want to fix it, or the difference between fixing and change. And what we really need, of course, is change.
That is an excellent segue into the question I want to now ask each of you. And that is, you know, we've talked a lot about what the issues are that we're seeing, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what you think needs to happen. And Ronnie, I'll start with you, because I think one of the things that really comes through in your memoir is the fact that just having more Aboriginal police in the police force is not going to change it. And you've already mentioned your belief in abolition, which is shared by many of us that work in the systems. I have that view about child protection as well, that there is no fixing it, there's no padding around. But it can be a confrontational idea for people, this idea of defunding the police or abolition. So I wanted to give you a bit more of a chance to talk about what it actually means in practice, and why so many of us who work in the justice system or around social justice issues are interested in this as an idea.
Yeah, I think it's like, as Aboriginal people, we were already practicing it, abolition. With what I just said earlier, we don't call police, we don't call 000. It's not the first people. They're not a point of safety for us. They don't offer us a service. They're not protecting us. Even as victims of crime, as a last resort, we'll call the police, or the Dungais in my language. And then we're, you know, always misidentified and arrested ourselves and end up in at the back of a paddy wagon, or we've got our children being removed. And I want to talk about Aunty Barb's point. We only make up 3.5 of the population in our own country, yet we're the highest incarcerated. So that tells me, it's evident, and the stats don't lie, the data doesn't lie, that police, how are they getting to prison? It's by police charging my people, and they go to court and they're being incarcerated. That tells you the level of surveillance, targeting, racially profiling and stalking that they do to my people. Like you mentioned, like a predator, a shark, they're almost waiting for one of us to fuck up to find something on us. And what people don't know is that before cops go out and start their shift, they're given a list of how many arrests they need to make, given a list of how many RBTs they need to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to just quickly talk about deaths in custodies as well, which Aunty Barb touched on. Almost every Aboriginal family in this country has been affected by a death in custody. And even if we don't, there's one in WA at the moment, and even though as us fellas, we don't know the family, we're not connected to them, we grieve with them, we cry with them, and then, so they're grieving, they've got to bury their loved one, and then they start the coronial inquest in relation to the death of their loved one, where they bear witness to the very last breath that their loved one took. That's traumatic. And then as a community, we know there's never any reckoning. So there's never any accountability. And even when police are charged or correctional staff are charged for the killing of our people, we already predict the outcome. Call us Nostradamus, I don't know, but no one ever's been convicted yet in this country for a death of any of my people.
Thank you. No, it's so true. I mentioned at the beginning, I had a cousin who was a death in custody. Lloyd Boney was one of the deaths investigated by the Royal Commission, and people might remember that there was a police video of a party that came out where the police had gone in fancy dress with a noose around their neck. Yeah, that was my cousin. So we have almost, as Ronnie says, we can have a visceral reaction.
And that's disgusting. They would have been we put in complaints, and this is another thing. In order to put a complaint in about the treatment or the lack of treatment or the lack of care by police, or them not providing us safety, or the brutality that they've been forced on us, we have to go to the police to put a complaint about the police. So the complaint goes nowhere. And our complaints aren't taken serious. And the reason why, I've worked it out, I mean, I'm no genius, but they don't look at us as good victims because they're so used to locking us up. Simple as that.
Thank you. Aunty Barb, you've done a lot of work on law reform as well through the years. What are some of the things that you think are important to happen in terms of changing the situation?
Yeah, look, the silly thing is, with the law the way it is, and the way it has been forever and a day, is that they keep doing the same old thing. If you keep doing the same old thing, day in, day out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, you're going to get the same results. So if you're getting the same results today as we were getting 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, then clearly you need to change what we do. The wheels of justice, we understand that horrific crime has to have some sort of recourse, there has to be some sort of measure and control over it. But it seems to me that the great majority of people in custodial situations, at whatever level, juvenile up through, the most of them in there are for summary offences. And I think that's one particular area that we need to rethink, because, look, if someone doesn't pay the train fare or whatever, silly things, stole a bottle of booze or something, does it really require a jail term? Is there some other way we can treat this? I think a lot of money has been thrown at justice reforms over the years, but none of them tackle the core problem. And the core problem could be something like, instead of like the recourse the courts have is what's the word? Punishment. So it's crime and punishment. Can we look at another thing? Can we get away from punishment? Can we reclassify what is actually a crime? The kinds of crimes. There's corporate crime, which never seems to get done. There's career criminals who make a career out of doing nasty things. But so much of what happens, what I see in the system, is that so much is opportunism. And today, I do have to say, a lot of drug-related stuff. And that might be purveying drugs, it might be having more for personal use than is acceptable or whatever. Or it might be committing a crime to get money to keep your habit going. So, okay, there are those sorts of crimes, but surely, addictions need to be addressed.
That's it.
Right? Yep. Can we address the addictions? Can we treat the addictions rather than anything else? Look, I have to say I'm totally addicted to chocolate. It's not a crime. It's not a crime, That's my addiction. Once I used to have the tobacco, but I gave that up a long time ago. It wasn't a crime. I vote Labor. It's not a crime just because I'm a total leftist. It's not a crime. I think we have to decriminalise a lot of the things that we classify today as crime and look at it as a health issue.
Thank you, Aunt.
Or a social issue of some sort that we need to have a social reform, not a legal reform for, right? Oh, dear God. These lads inside and the girls inside, I had one, there's one lass in the book from Delwinia, which is called Sisters Green Sea Dreaming. They chose the title, I didn't. We let them do that. That's always nice for them to have ownership. You can get the book, and her name's in there, Brie Lanahan, and she wrote her life story and that. And it is just a total injustice. Her mother she was taken away from her mother by welfare because her mother was classified as not being anything. She grows up, Brie grows up, has a kid of her own, and because of she's on the welfare list, then they intervene in her life, and now she's in jail. And she argues, if the state is such a good parent, how come I'm here? You took me away from my mother, and you have made me what I am. So how come you call yourself a good parent or a better alternative than me growing up with my mother? And I think there's this total fragmentation of Aboriginal family. It continues, and it's all got to do with the first lie, terra nullius. When you tell the first lie, you've got to tell a lot of other lies to keep to justify your continued actions of genocidal stuff. I'm on a roll.
Excellent roll. Aunty Bronwyn, did you want to add?
Yeah, just turn it off or on? On? Most of the blackfellas are in jail today. It's crimes against property. And this has been the case since the first fleet, since white people first come here. And I heard some statistics today, which I can't remember. I'm never any good at those numbers or dates, but saying exactly that, you know, they're crimes against property, which means that property has become more important than humanity. So when you think of it in that way, it's a scary thought.
Yes. I just want to pivot because we've looked at the issues of injustice and racism in the legal system. We've looked at where the system's failing. But I think for me, what's really evident is that actually within our community, we have enormous resilience. I look at Ronnie's activism, her bravery in writing her work. I look at all the work Aunty Barb does, helping people tell their stories. I know what a huge influence Aunty Bronwyn has been on everyone in the community, and really we can frame these issues around the deficit, but I think we also need to acknowledge the strength in our community and the resilience, the fact that we keep fighting, the fact that there are people still wanting to try and do this work even though it's been so hard, even though we've had a Royal Commission that laid everything out. We had a Bringing Them Home report that laid everything out. We continue to have an evidence base, all of the things that Ronnie spoke about in terms of how we know that justice reinvestment and things like rethinking the way that we think about policing, all of these things show the resilience. So just my final question quickly to each of you is the question of where do you get your strength from? And I'll start with you, Ronnie.
Probably my grandchildren. I want them to grow up in a world that's safe for them. I don't want my daughter to have to worry about every time they leave the home, are they going to be arrested and die in custody? So they give me strength.
Lovely. Aunty Bronwyn, where do you get your strength from?
You know, I was lucky enough to grow up around a lot of old people. And I think that's, I never thought about it much when I was younger. I was rushing to get to Sydney and, you know, have an exciting life. But I think when I look back at that now, it's a place where all my strengths come from. It's a place I go back to. It's their words that I go back to, and you know, feeling what it was like to be with them. That's what I go back to.
Lovely. And Aunty Barb?
Oh, a few areas. I think. Let me just say quickly that doing the creative writing workshops in the jail, you hear the stories. We encourage the lads to tell them, and they have free, safe space to do that while we're there. But it's gut-wrenching, and you can't come away from the prison on any day and leave what you've heard behind you. You bring it out with you. So one of the things I think that keeps my strength up is the fact that those lads and lasses have been so courageous in bearing their souls, and I totally acknowledge and love that. Another thing that keeps me going is the strength, the solidarity among all Aboriginal people. I feel it on this platform here at this very moment, the solidarity here. We're all on the same page. And the other thing is it's in the genes.
Well, that's a lovely note to leave the session on, a little bit of wisdom from our three panellists. You can buy copies of their books, get them signed, have a chat, offer them a cuppa or buy them lunch to get some more wisdom. But thank you for spending time with us, and can we thank our panel, Aunty Barbara Nicholson, Veronica Gorrie and Aunty Bronwyn Penrith. Gabaninda Yalu.